Foreign powers, even U.S. adversaries, are buying influence in American universities by the billions. Qatar, China, and other countries donated as much money to U.S. elite universities in the last 4 years as they did in the previous 40. This is according to a new report shared exclusively with the Free Press. Top donors, Qatar and China, have poured in $29 billion to colleges, including Harvard, Cornell, Yale, and others since 2020.
This practice has been increasingly scrutinized, and that scrutiny is getting tougher. In April, President Trump ordered these institutions to fully disclose how much they're raking in from international sources.
Joining us now to elaborate is Free Press reporter Frannie Block. Welcome to Rising.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we really appreciate you discussing this topic with us. When we say Qatar, China, and others are putting money into elite universities, what do we actually mean by that? What is the mechanism of that? Are they just like writing checks to the president of Harvard saying, here's some money? What are they doing?
So basically, all of this data that I wrote about in the Free Press, this is based off of public disclosure requirements. So the government has technically been tracking any donation from either a foreign government or a foreign donor to a U.S. university since like the 1980s. However, this data is not super comprehensive. And we've seen in the past couple of years many different examples of universities kind of trying to get around having to disclose this data. I know during Trump's first term, for example, they found over $6 billion in unreported funds that were coming from foreign sources. So this is kind of an imperfect data set, but it's all based off of public disclosures.
And Frannie, in the last 4 years, we mentioned some of the countries that are the major donors, but topping the list is actually Germany. Is that correct?
It is actually in the last 4 years, and a large chunk of that German funding, I was kind of perplexed by this when I first saw it too, a large chunk of that has to do actually with COVID-19 vaccines. So there was actually a settlement that Germany, a German biotech pharmaceutical company, had to pay the University of Pennsylvania in the multi-millions just a few years back because they were accused of improperly giving credit to the University of Pennsylvania's vaccine technology in manufacturing COVID vaccines. So I think that explains some of the German funding, but it was a peculiar data point that I did find very interesting in this data.
That is very interesting. So we would not take that one to be necessarily nefarious. Not that any of these are, I guess, necessarily nefarious, but we are obviously at a moment in our political identity as a country where we are concerned about rising tensions with China. We're trying to work out economic policies with China, trade policies with China. Is there some perception that China is trying to make the elite academic community, the next leaders of the free world are often graduates of elite institutions, more friendly to China, and then that's the kind of political valence of the spending?
Obviously, given what we've seen happen on college campuses over the past 2 years, it's understandable that people are concerned that foreign countries are essentially buying influence on our campus. However, I want to stick just to kind of what this data is telling us, which is actually, unfortunately, not a ton. And I do think that's part of kind of this new movement now for greater accountability and where this foreign funding is, one, coming from, but also where it's going on college campuses. Because unfortunately, what we can't do with this data is track what departments is it funding, what programming is this funding on college campuses. Now, when it comes to Qatar, we actually do know that a lot of that money is going towards Education City in Doha, which is Qatar's capital. So Qatar is actually subsidizing many different campuses of top universities, Northwestern's Journalism School, Georgetown's Foreign Policy School, so that they can have campuses in Doha. A lot of Qatari money going into U.S. universities goes towards that. But other than that, we don't really understand where this money is going. And I think, again, that's a really big, important question. And it does raise concerns about how easy it could be for a foreign power to buy influence on an American university campus, because it's simply something we're not really tracking.
I wonder, Frannie, if there's an interesting sort of dichotomy or tension here, because on one hand, we mentioned in the introduction that the Trump administration is tightening requirements as far as disclosure for this kind of funding is concerned. And then on the other hand, we have had the president threaten to freeze funding for various American institutions himself. And I note that in your list from the data of some of the biggest beneficiaries of foreign funding, There are at least 4 colleges that have in some way been in the president's crosshairs over alleged anti-Semitism or anything else. For our viewers' information, I'm talking about Harvard, Cornell, UPenn and Johns Hopkins. Is there any danger that funding freezes, if it comes to that, actually opens the door wider for this kind of foreign funding?
Absolutely. And it's actually the same question that I asked researchers at the Network Contagion Research Institute who helped give this data to the Free Press. I asked them that directly, and I do think that there are concerns if there are funding freezes, so money from the federal government that normally would go to a school like Harvard that's no longer going to a school like Harvard. Obviously, universities are going to be incentivized to look elsewhere to fill that gap. Now, whether or not they go seek out foreign funds, we don't know what they're going to do. But I do think that foreign countries, particularly authoritarian regimes seeking to gain influence in American university life, they're going to see a huge opportunity here. But I'll also add that with Trump's new disclosure requirements, he actually hasn't added any new requirements. He's essentially kind of increased the federal government's enforcement mechanism for ensuring that universities are complying. But there also are other ways for foreign governments to also get around that as well. They can send money through nonprofits in the United States and then send that to universities. And that's not technically something that needs to be disclosed under this Section 117 funding. So I do think that we are going to see an increase in foreign funding continue. Now, whether or not the federal government is going to have actually the capability to crack down on that or what they're going to do to crack down on that, I don't know. So we'll see what happens.
Frannie, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Next up on Rising, a monumental West Wing shakeup. What's next for National Security Advisor Mike Waltz?